What's up guys, Ryan with Cycle News. Welcome to our 2023 450 Motocross Shootout. This is some of the most fun we get to have all year round when we get to test all the new 450 motocross bikes. We've had 6 different test riders over 2 different days at 2 different tracks. It's a lot of man hours, it's a lot of work, but it's super rewarding when we get to bring you the results like this. Big shout out to all the manufacturers that came out, all the gear brands that supported us with gear for this test, and the tracks for letting us come out and ride. Now before we get into this video, I gotta thank the guys at Maxima. They provided us with some awesome SC1 over 2 days of riding, prepping the bike and getting the bikes freshened up. SC1 is absolutely essential for keeping the dirt off, keeping the bike shined up, keeping our helmets looking good. Could not do it without those guys. Be sure to check them out online or at your favorite Maxima retailers. We're gonna bring you some specs on all the bikes, talk about each one, and then we're gonna break it into the actual results. So stay with us and hopefully you can learn something about all these new models. So first up, we have the 2023 Yamaha YZ450F. The Yamaha has an MSRP of $98.99 and a wet weight of 241 pounds. This is likely the most anticipated bike in this year's test. The YZ enters an entirely new generation with a complete ground-up redesign. New frame, new motor, practically new everything. The Yamaha shed 5 pounds from last year and 3 of that comes out of the engine alone. They've upped the rev limiter for increased power in the top end range, and they've also attempted to ditch that wide front end feeling with new, slimmer bodywork in the rider cockpit. Familiar KYB suspension and the easy to use Power Tuner app are back for 2023, but the big question is, after years of winning shootouts, will the new YZF still be a contender for the win? The 2023 Kawasaki KX 450. The Kawasaki retails for $95.99 and has a wet weight of 246 pounds. The Kawasaki KX 450 returns for 2023 with virtually no changes from the previous year. Since its inception in 2019, this generation KX has been a contender in nearly every shootout. With its Ergo Fit system, hydraulic clutch, Showa suspension, and 3 coupler mapping systems, it's still the heaviest bike in the test aside from the Suzuki, but we'll get to that in a second. While the other bikes are all new for this year, the Kawasaki's tried and true character hopes to win over our riders. Next up, the 2023 GasGas MC450F. The GasGas has an MSRP of $10,199 and a wet weight of 236 pounds. Another one of the unchanged bikes for this year is the GasGas MC450F. The GasGas is the 3rd brand under the KTM Group umbrella and is marketed as the more fun and affordable option. Therefore, it rides on last year's technology, while the 23 KTM and Husqvarna models receive full redesigns. GasGas comes with a steel frame, WP air forks, and Brembo brakes and clutch systems. Silver wheels, cast triple clamps, and no map switch add to its simpler nature. It's the most affordable of the 3 Austria bikes and is the lightest one in the entire group when measured fully fueled. Next we have the 2023 Husqvarna FC450. This bike has an MSRP of $10,999 and a wet weight of 240 pounds. The Husqvarna FC450 is all new for 2023. Like its orange brother, it gets a new frame, engine, and bodywork for the new year. The Husqvarna is the most premium of the Austrian bikes and comes equipped with all the bells and whistles like traction control and quick shifter. While the Husqvarna and the KTM both ride on WP suspension, the biggest difference here is the suspension on the Husqvarna is 10 millimeters lower. This in turn lowers the seat height by about 1 inch and the ground clearance by roughly half that. Besides that, the plastic and most obvious the new gray and white colors stand out as the major differences between the Husqvarna and the KTM. Next we have the KTM 450 SXF. The KTM retails for $10,899 and has a wet weight of 239 pounds. The KTM enters a lineup considered the race-ready machine in the Austrian fleet. This is the first year of this generation which sports a new frame, motor, and electronics package. In terms of electronics, it has a dual map switch, traction control, and a new quick shift option. The engineers tweaked the mounting points for the shock inside the frame but kept the familiar WP air forks and quality Brembo components. We've praised the KTM in the past for its lightweight nature, but it did gain some pounds during this update and loses its spot as the lightest in the class. Next we have the Honda CRF450R. The MSRP on the Honda is $95.99, but the 50th anniversary edition as tested retails for $98.99. This bike has a wet weight of 243 pounds. Honda's flagship motocross bike is deep in its current generation, which launched back in 2021. For this year though, the frame was reinforced for added flex and the suspension settings have been tuned to match. Honda says their goal was to free up the function of the bike while still letting the suspension, engine, and frame flex individually. Several engine internals are smaller too, with a narrower intake port, reduced throttle body, and a smaller exhaust. Overall, the bike's been touched up to be a smoother package. While you won't see the Suzuki in this test, we still have to talk about the 2023 Suzuki RM-Z450. This bike is the least expensive in the lineup at $89.99 MSRP, but has a wet weight of 247 pounds. The Suzuki is still the cheapest bike in the group by almost $500, but it's also the heaviest. And yes, it's the only one with a kickstart. The mellow power character actually allows you to ride the RM-Z close to its potential, and the slim profile carves up a smooth track with noticeable ease. However, once the track gets rough, so does the overall riding experience. The bike is overly stiff, and the lack of chassis and suspension development rears its head as the track starts to break down. The RM-Z has served us well in a number of ride days and races. We can only hope that with Ken Roxon now at the controls in the Supercross department, the brand will start putting some extra money into their R&D department. All right, no one wants to say it, but one of these bikes has to be last. In 6th place for 2023, we have the Honda CRF450R. And while it takes the cake by far in the looks department, the Honda finds itself in the back of the pack for this year's Shootout. Let's start with the good. We already mentioned the looks, but the 50th anniversary package on the Honda just looks so dang good. At $300 more than the standard R, it includes gold wheels, blue seat cover, and the special edition graphics. The standard CRF450R is tied as the most affordable bike aside from the Suzuki at $95.99. The motor on the 23 is better than it has been in the years past, and overall the Honda has refined this engine package to be smoother and more rideable in all areas of the power curve. The 3 map settings do make a difference and offer a tailor-fit ride for all of our ability levels. The faster guys favored the standard and more aggressive maps, which are 1 and 3, while the novice riders obviously favored the smoother version map 2. Traction control is available on the Honda, but is a hit or miss depending on rider preference. The overall rider cockpit is slim and comfortable right away, just what you'd expect from a Honda. Sitting, standing, and moving around on this bike is just overall easy. This generation sports the rounded seat and sharp styling, which is very European if you ask us. No matter which way you cut it, the Honda is just too stiff. Faster riders might not notice it as much, but once you back off that pro pace, the bike becomes much harder to ride. The frame, suspension, clutch pull, even the grips are simply too harsh for us to enjoy for more than a few laps. The deep and sandy conditions mask this rigidity a bit, but the hard-packed dirt at Quia Creek showed the bike's true nature as it bounced over the chattery bumps. Almost all of our guys worked on this by softening the fork and shock, which did help for a bit, but the overall stiffness contributes to how the bike feels in the rider's hands. This rigid character makes the bike feel heavy and less flickable when compared back to back with the others. It does feel stable, but at times you're fighting with the lightweight and fidgety front end. It's a battle we had a hard time fighting in just the 2 short days we spent with the Honda. Unfortunately, the overly stiff nature of the CRF drops it to 6 in our ranks for this year. Up next, we have the Husqvarna FC450. This is the lowest ranked Austrian bike in our test, but 5th, 4th, and 3rd place all found themselves very close in the overall rankings. The Husky is one of 3 all-new bikes in the lineup. This can be a blessing or a curse, as it's rare that a manufacturer nails a new gen design in the first model year. While there was a variety of results on the Husqvarna, one thing we could all agree on was the velvety smooth nature of the overall package. The new engine offers great delivery, but still retains that classic long revving character from the Austrian power plants. This is also where the Husqvarna differs from the KTM, as the airbox has a slightly different design for a bit calmer engine character. You can carry gears on these bikes longer than some of the other ones, and you don't need to waste energy shifting all over the track. In that same vein, it never feels like it's too much or like the bike is going to get out from underneath you. The bike is so smooth, in fact, that most of our riders favored the aggressive green map. The brakes and clutch are also top-notch on the Husqvarna. While some riders don't love a hydraulic clutch, the Brembo components on the FC offer comfortable modulation with identifiable engagement. Things start to get tricky in the suspension department. The fork and shock on the Husqvarna are 10mm lower than the KTM. This lowers the seat height by about an inch and puts the bottom of the bike about half an inch closer to the ground. The good part about this is that it gives the bike a velcroed feeling to the dirt. It feels planted to the ground, stable at speed, and is the undisputed king of flat turns. This bike excelled on the hard packed conditions of Quia, as riders could slice across the track late in the day to avoid bumps. The swept back bend of the Pro Taper bars also contribute to an overall lower feeling. The downside is this lowered character wasn't favored by our taller riders. While most of our riders were about 5'10" and above, they noted that the cockpit felt small and cramped. Standing up felt like riding your short buddy's bike, low-rise bars and lower to the ground. The shorter stature also gave us the feeling on the bike that made it a bit longer. Like we said, it was stable, but it's a unique attribute that only the Husqvarna has. We're truly splitting hairs at this point. Shorter riders will obviously favor the Husqvarna, and taller guys can adapt after you bolt on your favorite set of bars. In 4th place, we have the Yamaha YZ450F, and it finds itself in a similar predicament as the Husqvarna, an all-new model year and a variety of rider opinions. We had high hopes for the Yamaha, as the previous generation dominated shootouts for the past few years, and no doubt the Yamaha has the strongest motor of this group. The new engine is faster, revs higher, and maintains that tractability that we liked from last year's bike. It has a torquey bottom end that pulls wheelies out of the inside rut and transitions seamlessly into a meaty mid-range. They've bumped up the rev limiter by 500 RPMs, which puts the Yamaha on par with the Austrian bikes as you near the engine's redline. 2 maps are available via the handlebar switch, and you can still use the Yamaha Power Tuner app to add multiple maps into that, or choose your favorite one to upload it into the bike. Continuing with the newness is the overall cockpit and rider triangle. Finally, finally, Yamaha has pretty much eliminated that wide feeling that seemed to be our only complaint from the previous generation. Now the bike is sharp and narrow while still maintaining that front-facing airbox. And that design is also quieter and doesn't make as much of that vacuum noise that it did from last year. This is probably the thinnest YZ we can remember aside from the two-stroke models. Yamaha brings back KYB suspension components for this year. This has always been a strong suit of the Yamaha, but finding balance this year was a bit harder than we have found in the years past. It felt like when we got the front end dialed, the rear felt out of line and unpredictable, and vice versa. When the rear felt stable, the front end seemed vague or felt like it was going to knife in the corner. We know there's potential, but simply 2 days of testing and trying to find the setup is what hindered the Yamaha's overall ranking. We have to give Yamaha credit for stepping things up with the new toolless adjusters on the fork, as it makes tuning them on the side of the track easier than ever. In terms of fit, finish, and overall quality, the Yamaha is right up there with the best of them. The Power Tuner app is a great tool to have for tuning the engine or checking your basic maintenance intervals. Unfortunately, we just had a hard time finding a good setup on this bike in our 2 days of testing, and that's what really hindered the Yamaha in the overall rankings. The GasGas MC450F finds itself in 3rd place this year. The GasGas ranked as high as 1st for some of our novices and was still on the podium for some of our faster riders. We like the GasGas for its easygoing personality. It's not a fire breather like the Yamaha, and it's also not as sporty as the KTM or the Husqvarna. It rides on the previous generation KTM frame, which was well liked for its supple nature and good bump absorption. As with the other steel frame bikes, the GasGas aces flat turns and transitions nicely from side to side. The WP air forks come with softer settings than those on the KTM, and they aren't the shorter spec like the ones on the Husky. This makes the bike feel less harsh, especially when the track wears out late in the day. Our slowest rider said it was the most forgiving bike of the day, while our fastest one said he could ride this bike all day long. The GasGas motor is another strong suit, as it features that familiar Austrian engineering. It does not come with a map switch, so riders only have that one pre-programmed map in the bike, although you can buy an aftermarket switch and load maps into it. The engine is smooth, a bit less racy than the KTM, but on par with the smooth roll-on of the Husqvarna. It also offers that long spread between gears and shows its racer DNA by revving highly into the RPM range. At 236 pounds full of fuel, the GasGas is still 4 pounds lighter than any other bike in this test. You can really feel that on track as it floats nicely over jumps and seems to carry speed easily into the corners. While also being the lightest Austrian bike on the wallet, the GasGas still comes with the premium Brembo brakes and hydraulic clutch system. If you don't need things like traction control, quick shift, name brand bars, machine triple clamps, and black wheels, then the MC450F is right up your alley. Now with 3rd, 4th, and 5th place behind us, we can move on to the solid 2nd place bike, the Kawasaki KX450. Despite being totally unchanged for this year, the Kawasaki still finds itself in 2nd place. The Kawi doesn't necessarily jump off the page or wow you with anything that's totally out of this world, but what it does is it does everything really well. It's so planted and predictable that laps flow together with noticeably less effort than some of the other bikes. The chassis is stable at speed through the fast stuff, but still nimble enough for you to switch up lines and hit the insides. It's not overly engineered. Its square seat and neutral rider triangle are likely most comparable to the Suzuki in terms of styling. It's smooth where you want it, like the initial roll-on, and the way it carries through the revs. At the same time, it offers a good punch and really encourages you to twist the throttle to the limit. It's an easy engine to ride and one of the only bikes where you can actually feel like you're getting the full potential out of it. The connectivity from the grip to the rear wheel is hard to beat, and input from the rider feels like a seamless transition. In the past few years, we felt like the modern 450s have verged on almost having excessive horsepower, which limits the overall rideability. The Kawasaki is reliable in terms of what we expect from the engine, and in turn, it lands it near the top of the list. Showa suspension comes standard on the KX, and this complements the chassis in a way that feels plush in the chattery bumps, but stiff enough to absorb a big landing. It's really the best of both worlds, we think. The rear end is planted to the ground and provides riders with the confidence to lay the power down and steer with the rear tire. In terms of changes, all we did was make a few clicker adjustments to the rebound to get the fork to sit better when cornering. Aside from that, the suspension package on the Kawasaki is pretty solid right out of the box. So if it's so good, why didn't it win? Well, good question. We still have a few complaints with the Kawasaki when we compare it directly to the winner. The stock levers and grips have simply got to go. Also, the Kawasaki is the heaviest bike of the bunch. You don't really notice the weight while riding, but more weight is essentially lost horsepower. And finally, the mapping couplers aren't a huge setback, but they will lose to a handlebar mounted switch every time. Granted, as a bike you're going to personalize, the Kawasaki could easily take the cake. Simply swap grips, levers, chain guide, sprocket, and you'd have a serious contender. Rumors say that there's a new 2024 model in the works, so here's hoping they touch up those minor details. Finally, in first place, we have the 2023 KTM 450 SXF. We said it's rare that a manufacturer gets it right in their first model year, but when they do, it's a treat for everyone. This is the final Austrian machine in our test, and it received the most first place votes, backed up with a nearly unanimous podium decision. This new engine is butter smooth, as we mentioned with the Husqvarna. The difference here is the KTM has a slightly different airbox, which gives it a bit more lively character. The KTM offers good pop down low and still spools up fast like it has in the past. Again, it lets the rider carry longer gears and require less shifting, which equals less energy and less thinking as you race around the track. We again favored the more aggressive Map 2 for its stronger pull from the bottom to mid-range and actually use traction control late in the day. The quick shift is a cool nuance, but not totally necessary, at least not at this time. The chassis and suspension are all the good things we liked about the Husqvarna, just without that lowered feeling. The KTM feels narrow between the knees, and despite adding weight for this model year, still feels light as you can maneuver it in the air or from the inside to outside lines. The new steel frame still gives that supple feeling in the choppy bumps, but is responsive upon rider input, especially in flat turns where there's no real rut to sink the bike into. The WP air forks continue to impress us. Sure, they're a bit more work to set up with initial air pressure, and that could be a deal breaker for you, but the small bump absorption has improved drastically from what it was a few years ago. This bike can skip through braking bumps and still take a big landing in stride. The shock is solid too, as it tracks well even when the track starts to deteriorate. Finger adjusters on the fork and the shock also made trackside tuning a breeze. Overall, the KTM found itself as the easiest bike to ride and simply the easiest bike to adapt to for all of our riders over the 2-day test. Our riders made the least amount of changes to this bike on both days and said that if they had to buy a bike on Friday and race it on Saturday, they would pick the KTM. Overall, it's hard to beat the fit and finish of the modern day KTMs, as they are truly a built to race machine. While the KTM stole the show this year, the other bikes weren't too far behind. 3 of these bikes were all new this year: the KTM, the Yamaha, and the Husqvarna, while the other 3 bikes received small or actually no updates. The Honda certainly wins best dressed. The Yamaha takes the honors for the strongest motor. Kawasaki is a close second, but KTM earns the best overall. With more time on each of these rigs or bolting on our own personal parts like bars, pegs, levers, etc., we could easily mold any of these bikes into a race day superstar. But for now, we take them as they are in stock form and wait until next year to continue the shootout action. Thank you guys so much for watching. That wraps up this year's 2023 450 Motocross Shootout. You'll be able to find a full write-up, spec sheet, and photos in the Cycle News magazine. You can check those out every Tuesday at cyclenews.com for free. Thank you to all the gear brands and manufacturers who contributed to our test this year. Until next time, guys, we'll see you out at the track.